Hello, my name is Nicholas Junker, and this is for AEP 855 Educational Leadership, Module 1 Introductory Video. A little personal demographics about me. I'm from a small town called Cuba, Kansas, which is in the northern central part of the state, right about 15-20 minutes from the Nebraska border. These small town roots kind of feed into who I am as a teacher. I'll talk later about relationship building, constantly being a part of my mantra as an educator, and will be as an administrator. This my second bullet here, I kind of had a little fun there with the abbreviations of the schools that I have attended so far. It was Hillcrest High School. I attended there up until our school closed in 2006. I then went to Republic County High School until my graduation date, 2010. I then went to Bethany College, graduated from there in December of 2014. After a few years teaching, I went back to get my master's in political science at the University of Kansas. A year after that, I wisened up, and then I'm now attending Fort Hays State University to get my master's in educational administration. And the photo is my wife. We were married in June of 2016. We have a little corgi there, as you can see in the photo, and he definitely dominates our life, and so he is very fun and engaging and enjoyable. He keeps me guessing for sure. I did the same thing with bullet number 5 there, the schools that I've taught at as well. So the first school I taught at was Larned High School. I taught there for 2 years. After that, that's when I went to the University of Kansas. And while at the University of Kansas, I did a stint in PE teaching, which was exciting and engaging, but definitely not my cup of tea. I then taught last year at Clifton Clyde High School. Now I'm in my new job at Republic County. A little bit of hobbies or things that are important to me. Family is of the utmost importance. And I think that's part of that building relationships concept or task that I prefaced before. Teaching is important it's important to me because I'm a 4th generation educator from my great grandma, and mom. They have built that into me, and that teachers can have a dramatic impact on the world. Politics is important to me. I love politics. I love government. I'm a government teacher, and so that definitely fits in. And I'm also involved in athletics. I played football at Bethany College. So some more demographics characteristics. I work at Republic County High School. I am the social studies teacher there. I teach American government, world history, current issues, psychology, and a little bit of junior high PE. At our school, we have a history of strong academic achievement in terms of ACTs. Our students go to good colleges and universities, and we also score highly on performance assessments in English and math, along with social studies whenever we do test that. Has a very traditional school culture, a great degree of, I would characterize as old-fashioned educators, which dictates that bullet point, we are slow to change. There are a lot of teachers here when I went to school here that teach in the same way, form, same pedagogy, same methodology, and so we're slow to update. But I think that says something to our strong student achievement as well. This year, we are hiring or replacing a 4th of our teaching staff going into this year. And so that great degree of turnover is trending our teachers younger, good, bad, or indifferent. That's just how it is. Last year, we passed a school bond for, I think, $19 to $20 million, and building a variety of classrooms, updating the school building, building a new gymnasium. And so things are great. And construction is still kind of ongoing, but we have a later start date to our school here. We don't actually start till September 2nd, which just seems crazy. So looking at these 4 questions that were posed on the assignment. Look at the first one: why did politics influence schools, but did not necessarily move school leaders to take action based on politics? In the reading, it briefly touched upon the historical school politics. I found it very interesting. My mom, when I talked to her about this issue, she always talked about that first bullet point: avoidance was survival. And so I found that interesting. She said at all costs she was avoiding politics in the school, and so I found that unique and interesting. Also touched upon in the reading was that it was politics was a way of political and social control. it stated in the reading that early on you had to be a part of a certain political party, you had to vote a certain way. It also was a way to keep teachers compliant. It said that it was a way to put female teachers, and that way they could keep their thumb on them, keep their thumb on the scale, and allowed for that operation of the school in the way that they saw fit. And then came later with the progressive movement, a little bit in John Dewey, talking about sanitizing education, separating the local governments and state governments and national governments from education, and keeping the independence in politics, because that is very important. It touched on that there were 13,000 separate school systems and around the nation, and I think that's vital, that independence. There are some places, I think the city of Chicago is one of them, that where their local governments do control. I know Washington D.C. also has that municipal control as well, and so kind of there, Washington D.C. kind of has that historically bad rap, but neither here nor there. So a couple of things I wanted to touch on as well. From the reading, politics doesn't necessarily move school leaders, because I think that school leaders have the responsibility to, as the quote said, balance competing needs, demands, and benefits. Our school is very homogenous, and so there's not a great degree of variance in our needs, but they still have to balance there. We still have a fair amount of low-income students. We don't have a great degree of diversity in terms of racial or ethnic diversity, but there's still a competing demands from various parts of the district, and it's important also that it didn't move school leaders, this because school districts are independent. They look to state legislatures for guidance and our state Department of Education for guidance, but it's typically local control. The second question: why did standards focused on outcomes and seemingly split the work and skills of a profession from the knowledge and wisdom of that profession? This is something as a social studies and government educator and engaged in politics, I find to be very important. So the standards focus is driven based on an accountability aspect. Politicians, especially individuals from my own party, conservatives, they want to see what they're getting for their dollar. Are they getting their bang for their buck? And so there's been a considerable push for accountability. Lately, we've been kind of taking our foot off the gas in terms of that, but for a while there, we were really attempting to push accountability. What are we getting taxpayers? What are taxpayers really getting out of that money that they're providing to school districts? And some of those were through state assessments, No Child Left Behind, and even the Every Student Succeeds Act, with those grants that are available if you do certain things or take on certain approaches. And it separates it because when you're looking at that accountability measure, it really tailors your teaching and your education and your school processes towards achieving well or doing well at those accountability measures, not necessarily authentic learning. And so professional educators are not able to use innovative methods as much, or collaborative problem solving, because you are focusing on that accountability measure. And one of the things I focus on a lot in my teaching is that whole student aspect, that social emotional, that developing that thinker, that learner. And a lot of times those are not demonstrated on those accountability measures. And so it's one of those things I think about, that age old question: is teaching an art or a science? And that it's both. Most people agree, whether it's scholars or people in practice, that it is both. And when you use that accountability measure, it is just a science, and you don't have those methods or items that really appeal to all learners and different learning modalities. The third question is why the standards evolved to explicitly call for school leaders' direct actions. So there's a variety of research here. The scholarly reasons are from the text. It said there's a half century of research, and so that research directly states that school leaders must be involved because the schools demand it. The school setting demands it. One of the things that's also said is schools reverberate with the way that they need to be involved. Students have a dramatic difference in need in what they're doing, and so those schools reverberate that. It's also about, the research says it's important to do school administration. It's no longer just a school manager or a person who makes sure that the hallways are clean and the ball games go on. It is about growing your students and growing your teachers, and that's part of it. And also is about using community and global trends throughout the education system of the United States. It has called directly upon the historical precedents that was brought before. But now what is happening is there is a dramatic shift towards a global society with the advent of the internet and technology, and the changes in the economy as well, is that people need to make sure that we are preparing our students for that 21st century. And to be able to do so, to be able to prepare those students, we have to have administrators and school leaders focusing on being direct action. Kind of those broad scope challenges involved with that. I think there are still those aspects I touched upon before, those federal, state, and local accountability measures. Taxpayers want to see what they're buying, and I think that's okay. As a government teacher, I think it's important to understand that if there are tax dollars that go to something, they should show some sign of outcomes. And now how they show those things is up to the districts. And so I think that's an important topic for school administrators, is that they need to be able to demonstrate what occurs, and I'll reference that later. What actions are they taking and what measurable outcomes come from those actions? Also, demographic shifts. The economy for the last 30 years has not shown growth in terms of wage growth. And so that has dramatically impacted society and dramatically impacted students and how they provide for themselves. And so you have a lot of students who work full-time jobs, who are closing down the restaurant at 8 or 10 o'clock if they're over 16. These things dramatically impact education, parenting, and so those things, and that kind of shifts into that demographic or economic challenges as well. And so those broad scope challenges also bring about issues and calls for direct action. So the last question is why school leaders must become political activists. One of the last questions is why school leaders must become political activists on behalf of students and families. The quote is, schools require leaders who are empowered to speak for students. I pulled a couple of quotes because I thought they were important. The first one is responsiveness to the contextual conditions of schools and the people inside them. One of the things I think is most important, and I think is difficult because school leaders don't typically stay at schools long. Looking at principals and superintendents from the school data and research, they don't stay long. And so it's difficult for them to be able to respond to that context, because they have to be engaged and involved in the community. My previous administrator at Clifton Clyde he did a tremendous job at that. He embraced the community. He got involved. He understood the problems and issues inside the community, because as we know, schools are just an echo chamber of what occurs outside of them. And so it's important to understand that. Also, they must become activists because there are underserved and marginalized individuals who are in their schools, who are in their communities, that need help, that need assistance. I prefaced before those thinking about low-income students, thinking about special needs students. At times, and thinking about minority students, like I said before, we're a pretty homogenous community, but we still have those needs, those issues that we have to address. The big one, especially in Kansas, is those lack of necessary resources. We are actually pretty blessed for the next 2 to 3 years for our state legislature to allow us that funding that we need going forward. But that was a very big issue going forward with budget cuts and the cut from the state. And so that's why it's important for them to become political activists. And that last bullet I highlight is important because I prefaced it before as well. Everybody in your school or district needs something different. And so it's vital to be able to have your finger on the pulse of that in the community, in that school, to be able to understand, to be able to balance what's best for the needs and what's best for the needs of the whole. And I look at it as in the same way as you govern. You don't write laws or legislation to satisfy one person. You have to take in the context and the needs of the whole. And I think that's very similar with the school administrator. Why do politics surrounding educational policies provide the strongest connection between what school leaders feel and do about their abilities to strategically think about how to handle it all? So looking at the political connection, is there such a great degree of external pressures? It's about achievement. It's about dramatic learning. It's about I mean, yesterday I was outside getting ready to walk into my school. My superintendent had got stopped by a family talking about how the press box wasn't going to be ready for football games, and he said he was reassuring them that it was, but it's just one of those basic aspects that you don't really consider a lot when you're trained to be a school leader. That those issues come to bat. We also have a great degree of diverse stakeholder groups. In our district, it's fairly homogenous, but a lot of districts in the state and around the country have such a great degree of variance in who their stakeholders are, rich, poor, black, white. It's such a great degree of variance, and so because of that, you have to be able to ensure that you understand the context. And that's why it's such a travesty that school leaders don't stay at schools longer, because they need to be able to understand the context of where kids are, what they're coming from, where they need to go, and follow that stewardship of a path of education. Also, I preface the accountability challenges and limiting resource before, but also legal challenges. It is vital to make sure that you put yourself in a position to make sure you follow all the rules, the laws, especially in terms of thinking about things like special education, Title IX, thinking about things like civil rights, and those are provide pressure as well. And look at the things about how to handle it all as well. An approach to policy is one of the things you have to look at is my personal philosophy, and your personal philosophy has to be something about putting students first. I talk a lot about my previous administrator, Clifton Clyde, because I felt like he did a really good job. He had this saying that as long as you're doing what you think is best for students, chances are your head's going to be in the right place. And I think that's vital. You can get overwhelmed by all of this politics and this political messaging, but as long as you're doing what's right for students, you're going to be all right. Also touching upon, it can be a big deal. It can be a giant weight on your shoulders, and that's why it's important as a school leader to develop a system of collaborative leadership, working with teachers, other administration, to be able to share that burden, and that way you also ensures buy-in as well. And then lastly, it's about community relationships. It's about going out in the community, telling people what you're doing, getting them in the school, getting your students outside of the school, building that bridge between the community so that way they understand if you have a need, they can suffice, because you are generally putting what's best forward and what's best forward for students. So kind of wrapping up here slowly, here is my personal and professional views, thoughts, and misgivings on politics. As a government teacher, I think I have maybe a greater understanding of how politics and people interact. And so I think it's vital for people to understand that politics is all about relationships, even in the school setting. And so the more that you build relationships, the more you build, I put coalition building upon how people understand, developing that empathy for what they need and developing that community outreach is vital to be able to understand and provide a quality education to students. Some thoughts and misgivings. Politics can cause and put students at a disadvantage. Excuse me. Because a lot of times people are trying to obtain power. In my congressional studies at the University of Kansas, it's all about power. People want and consider re-election more important, consider the political win more important. At times you can see that on the school board level as well. So that's why I hashed on that petty disagreements aspect as well, because even in my recent hiring at Republic County High School, there was an abstention, and it really made me think, well, do I have school support? Do I have the board support? Do I have administrator support? And so that aspect is difficult. And also one of the things I think about too is these last two here are positive, but yet they're kind of contentious as well. Power equals responsibility. If you have power as a school leader, if you build coalitions, if you build relationships, you have the responsibility to take action for your stakeholders and for your students, and that's vital. And that has a massive potential for you to grow your students and to grow your entire school district. And so ways that politics can improve and enhance your educational leadership. And one of the things that it's the old saying that all politics is local. You have to develop and understand the context and relationships that you live in and that your school operates in. Because if you don't, you're going to be in an uphill battle the entire time. I preface before that coalition building. Stakeholder buy-in is something I haven't touched on a lot, but I think that's vital. You have to have teachers, parents, students, community members, all involved in the process, because if they don't buy in, they're not going to support what you're doing and drive that success. Also important is that effective resource allocation. Taxpayers are putting money into your school district, and so you have to show them. It kind of fits in along with the last one there with demonstrated achievement. What are you doing with your resources to improve students to have greater outcomes? And so what deliberate actions are you taking to improve students? And I think that's important and will definitely improve educational leadership. And here's our resource here for politics, context of educational leadership. And that is my video. Thank you.